Concerns over run blocking, what to make of Joe Flacco, the future of preseason, and more. It's a Friday mailbag episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, September 2nd, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. The show is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button. You'll never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today, our episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Today, we are doing our weekly mailbag. Typically, we do it on Wednesdays, but because of cut down day, we had to move it around. I was actually originally going to do it on Tuesday. The Jets made a liar of me because at the end of Monday's show, I said we were going to do the mailbag on Tuesday. Then the Jets began making their cuts on Monday, so we had to talk about that on Tuesday. But thank you to everybody who sent in mailbag questions. Our first question is about Jets run blocking. I know it's preseason, but are you concerned at all about the run blocking of this team after they did not get much push against the Giants' reserves? I feel like they should have steamrolled backups. I am concerned about it, and it's less to do with the preseason performance against the Giants, although that was concerning. It's more to do with the fact that they just threw an offensive line together in the middle of August. And it's not easy to do. Listen, they had a tough spot because they lost Mekhi Becton, obviously, and had to bring in Dwayne Brown. It just makes it difficult. But you can't throw an offensive line together in the middle of August, halfway through the preseason or halfway through training camp, and expect that it's going to go smoothly right off the bat. I think that we're looking at an offensive line that's probably going to struggle in the early part of this season. It's tough. Offensive line's a spot where you need chemistry. You need continuity. You need guys who know what the other guy is going to do. You need to know what the guy next to you is going to do. And you only have like a split second to decide. If there's like a stunt or a twist, you need to know that the guy next to you, how he's going to pick it up, the angle he's going to play. In the run game, communication's key, but it's tough to communicate that quickly. In some level, it comes down to just getting game reps. I'm not a big preseason proponent. I don't have an issue with a team resting its players, but I'm glad that the Jets did play their starters for at least a little bit against the Giants, because the way training camp practices are right now, they're not really live anymore. There's not really a lot of hitting that happens at training camp practices. So really the only game situation you get before the start of the season are in the preseason games. And because Brown signed so late, he wasn't ready for the first one. The second one, he may not have been ready for. They had bad weather anyway. So it's a tricky spot for the Jets to just throw together an offensive line the last minute. And I said this, not many teams have good offensive line depth. So I can't really get on the Jets too much for needing to sign Dwayne Brown, because I think that's true of a lot of teams. There are not many teams with 3 starting caliber tackles. The Jets were kind of lucky last year. They kind of fell into Morgan Moses. The one thing I do wonder, could Brown have been signed earlier? And that's something I don't know. Would the Jets have paid Brown as much money? Now, the Jets are paying Brown like a starter. Would the Jets have been willing to pay him starter money before Mekhi Becton went down? That's something I don't know. Would it have been a good idea? Perhaps. I think it would have been preferable to have the backup, whoever the backup was going to be, there for the start of training camp, so that he could at least work through the entire camp with his teammates. I think it's a really tough spot, though. I think this, on paper, this offensive line looks like it's going to be decent, but they don't know how to work together yet. So I'm expecting some pretty major growing pains in the early part of the season, and we saw that against the Giants. At least they got a few reps together. At least now they can look at some film and see how they maybe mishandled a play here or there. But yeah, I'm worried about it, because it's just tough to do what the Jets are trying to do right here. And we saw this a couple of years ago with Ryan Khalil when they threw him in at the center position in the middle of training camp. Now, it's a little different, I think, with Dwayne Brown, because Brown always intended to play, whereas you get the feeling Khalil was never really in it. Looking back on it, because Khalil had retired, and it seems like the Jets just got him off off his couch. Brown, it seems like he always intended to play this year, so you'd think he kept himself in better shape. But there's football shape, and then there's being in good shape, and Brown may take some time to get into football shape himself. So it's a tough spot. It's just less bad than the alternative, which would have been, I don't know, throwing rookie Max Mitchell out there to start a tackle or keeping Idoga. It's not like the Jets had a lot of good options once Mekhi Becton went down. Mekhi Becton needed to stay healthy for this team. Otherwise, you were going to have some sort of issue on the offensive line. It's just the way it goes. You lose your right tackle for the season, it's going to have an impact. Hopefully, the line gels quickly, and hopefully by October, these guys are playing up to their talent levels, because on paper, again, this line does have some talent, and if these guys work well together, it should still be a pretty good offensive line without Mekhi Becton. But I think it's going to take time, and I think it's not a surprise that they struggled so much against the Giants, because it's not ideal to have an offensive line come together so late and have so few opportunities to work together. Our next question: where does Chris Streveler, the defense leveler, rank among Jets preseason heroes? Oh, he's got to be at the top, doesn't he? 3 games, 3 fourth-quarter game-winning comebacks. I think that's number one. I mean, I try to think through the years of like some other iconic Jets preseason players. I think back to 2000. I think it was like the 2008 range. It was Brett Ratliff and David Clowney. That was kind of the last generation's Streveler to Calvin Jackson combination. 2013, Matt Sims. Now, I don't know like who we're including here. Are we including players who like actually have a shot at being good? Because in 2007, Kellen Clemens dominated preseason. And although Kellen Clemens turned out to really not be much of an NFL quarterback, at that point he was a second-year player who the Jets had just drafted in the second round. So Kellen Clemens could be in the mix. I'm trying to think of some guys from a longer time ago, but nobody's really coming to mind. But I do think, however, 30 years from now, we may still be talking about Chris Streveler and everything he did in preseason. Everything, it's amazing. 3 games, 3 comeback victories. Chris Streveler, my hat's off to you. And Chris Streveler is back on the practice squad, so who knows? Maybe he'll get a chance to show some of that magic in the regular season. Next question: with the continuing of injuries league-wide, what do you think the preseason looks like in 5 years? It's an interesting question. And, I actually found a study. There was an academic study about the 2020 season. And that was an interesting scenario. Because of COVID, they did not play a preseason that year. So the study looked at whether there were more injuries in the early part of the season, the year where there was no preseason. And they came to the conclusion that there were more injuries in the early part of the regular season in 2020. So that could be an argument for preseason. And I am not at all a fan of preseason football. I mean, some of these games I'd rather watch paint dry. And some of these games are just really the Atlanta game. It was just, I'm sitting there watching that saying, why do we need this game? But, some of these games can get kind of fun. I thought the Giants game actually got kind of fun once the starters went out. Once you saw I think there are a couple of reasons, though, that preseason will stay around in some form. The first is something that I mentioned is it's really your only opportunity because of the way practices go these days. It's really your only opportunity to get real game action for players, get anything resembling game reps. I think the other aspect of this is that you do have decisions to make at the bottom of the roster. You have to decide who the last players you're going to keep are, who are the players who just don't make the team. I mean, some of these decisions really come down to the wire. I think some of them are really close, and seeing players in that game action, that could help you make a decision. Now, could we see a scenario where the NFL goes to an 18-game regular season? That was always the rumor. There was always the rumor back when it was 16 that when they expanded, they'd go to 18. I don't think the players wanted to do it, so the compromise was 17. But I will always bet on the NFL doing what it takes to make more money. Because if you add an 18th regular season game, you're going to make more money. Maybe not so much from the ticket sales, because season ticket holders have to buy the preseason ticket. So if you replace if you go to 2 preseason games, 18 regular season, you're not really going to make more money at the stadium. but you probably will make more money in the TV deal because all the networks will get an extra game, extra week of worth of football, so they'll have to pay up. I could see that. I think preseason is going to stick around in some form. Maybe we go to 2 games, but injuries happen, but injuries also happen in regular season games too. And I understand, it's different losing a player in the regular season in a real game versus losing him in a game that doesn't matter. But there is at least some degree of evidence that preseason games help players get into shape, and maybe the lack of preseason in 2020 led to more injuries. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue with our weekly mailbag. We're going to talk Joe Flacco, the backup quarterback, his role on the Jets. That's as we continue on this Friday mailbag. Now, I don't think you can actually bet on whether the preseason will exist in 5 years, but you can bet on practically anything else at betonline.net. It's your number one source for all of your sport, pro, and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all of the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games. BetOnline is also your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite sports and events, including baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. The NFL is just a week from beginning its regular season, so you can lay some money down on the Jets when they play Baltimore. Also, college football action this weekend. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day, and make sure you check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview. It's an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. Local team experts such as myself and NFL insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network all combine to produce one ultimate NFL preview. Search for the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And we continue with our weekly mailbag. Our next question is about our good friend Joe Flacco. Do you think Flacco is just there to collect a paycheck? His play Sunday was not only the fault of the offensive line. Bad throws, bad decisions. I want Mike White to start. Flacco can do nothing else to prove himself. Should Mike White start week 1? I think Zach Wilson should be the starting quarterback for the Jets week 1, if he's ready. Now, I'm not saying you rush Zach Wilson back if there's a significant risk of him being compromised, but the Jets need Zach Wilson in the lineup. This is not a team that did a great job with the backup quarterback spot in the offseason. There were players out there who could be steadying forces. The Jets did not get any of them. Is Flacco collecting a paycheck? Well, I've heard players talk about this in interviews. I have heard them say that, their last couple of years in the NFL, they're just there to cash in one last time. I could not tell you whether Flacco is one of those players. I kind of feel like no. If you listen to Flacco still wants to be a starting quarterback in this league, and he still thinks he's going to figure out how to earn a job. But listen, you saw what you saw on Sunday, and you've seen what you've seen with Joe Flacco for the last 8 years. I mean, I think you could make an argument that's pretty strong that the last time Joe Flacco was an effective starting quarterback in this league was the 2014 season where the Ravens went to the divisional round of the playoffs. And since then, it has not been pretty for Joe Flacco. I mean, you saw the decision-making Sunday. The deep ball is not there. Can you get one good game out of Flacco? Maybe. I think there's always that one great game that's in a quarterback who's aging, but I don't think you can get any more from him. I still don't know you go to Mike White, though. Mike White did play well against the Giants on Sunday, but he played poorly the first 2 preseason games. He played poorly preseason last year. He played poorly against Buffalo. There's a lot of evidence that Mike White, that game against Cincinnati, was just kind of a career game. That was just kind of completely out of context, that there was nothing really that was sustainable about it. He did not complete a deep pass in that entire game. I still can't get over throwing for 405 yards and not completing one deep pass. And you never take the game away from Mike White. I think this is the issue people have, is it's not that you're taking away what Mike White did. You're just saying that this is not a formula for repeatable success. You're evaluating going forward. Is what Mike White did against Cincinnati the type of thing he's going to be able to do in the future and still have the same level of success? Probably not. All the credit in the world for how he played against the Bengals, but I don't think he's going to be able to do it going forward. And Streveler was fun, but come on, it was preseason against fourth stringer. So regrettably, I think if Zach Wilson can't go, Flacco is the best option. Maybe he's the least bad option, but there really are no good options for the Jets. I think Flacco's the least bad because maybe you run into that great game. I don't think Mike White's going to run into another great game playing the way he plays. Maybe Flacco's got something in here where he channels the Baltimore version of himself, maybe the motivation of playing against his former team that let him go a couple of years ago. I'm grasping at straws here, but that's all we can really do with this quarterback spot if Zach Wilson's not ready to go, because I just don't think that the Jets have done a particularly good job. Our next question. John, how did GMs handle the logistics of the final cutdown day? Do they wait until the last possible moment in the hopes someone calls to offer a trade for the player they plan to cut? Do they make calls offering players, even if it lowers the value of the player? Would there be advantages to clearing roster space earlier than other teams? Any other considerations? Well, I think that there's no one answer. I think every situation is a little bit different. I think if there are players you think you may be able to trade, you hold on to them to the last minute and you work the phones, you try and make it happen. But as we saw this week, the Jets got their cuts going early. They cut a number of guys the day before the deadline. So I've seen the Jets handle things all sorts of different ways. The Jets were actually on time this year. We knew that they announced their cuts around 4 o'clock. The Jets normally we're going to like 5, 6, 7 o'clock before the Jets officially announce everything. And that's because it takes time to file everything with the league. You have to remember all 32 teams are making transactions, so it's going to take time for the league to process everything and make things official. And it's probably that they are working the phones. I don't think they do it with every player, because I think certain players don't have any trade value. The other thing I'd say is that I've seen people talk about the Jets had 7 players claimed off waivers, or they should have traded one of them. I don't know that any of those players had trade value. It's one thing to say, well, this guy's available now. He was cut. He's available for free. We'll grab him. That doesn't necessarily mean you'd be willing to give up an asset to get that player, especially the guys who get claimed off waivers. They tend to be more bottom of the roster type of players. So it's not like you it's not like you necessarily trade for them. I think you always try and get something in return for these players, but I think if the Jets could have gotten anything for the guys that they cut, they would have. I think that it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to trade a player, then obviously waiting until the last minute's help is what you do. Otherwise, I think it kind of varies, and I don't think it matters that much. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will close out our weekly mailbag. We'll talk about the talent level on the roster. We'll talk about Zach Wilson. That's as we conclude this Friday Locked On Jets episode. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Friday, we're doing our weekly mailbag. Our next question. Per Over the Cap, the Jets have the highest active spending amount, plus a quarterback on his rookie contract. Where is all the talent for this pricey roster? Might one conclude that this roster has enough talent because they're spending so much money, but just doesn't know how to win? That would be a coaching issue. What is it? Is there not enough talent, or do they just not know how to win? So I think the question here is, Jets are spending a lot of money. So we're saying that playoffs are not really the objective this year. How do you square this? You got a quarterback on a rookie deal. You got teams that just spent a lot of money, yet we're saying playoffs aren't to the expectation. So is it the team's not talented enough? Is it that the coaching isn't good enough that they can't take a talented team to the playoffs? Which is it? I think that's the question. And I think it's a little bit more complex than that. The Jets spent a lot of money this offseason because they had one of the worst rosters in the league last year. So they spent a lot of money to upgrade the roster. So get from point A to point B is pretty tough. But I think the big reason people are saying playoffs are not the expectation this year is there are so many young players who are core players for this team going forward. 7 players drafted the last 2 years in either round 1 or round 2. That doesn't even include Michael Carter, who's going to be a prominent player on the team this year. He was a 4th-round pick a year ago. It doesn't include Michael Clemens, who was a 4th-round pick this year, who looks like he's going to be in the rotation on the defensive line and could potentially be productive. You have lots of young players who are learning the game, still developing, probably going to make mistakes at some point that you got to work through. Now, here's what I'll say. The Jets cannot be 4-13 again this year. They cannot win 2 games like they did in 2020. There has to be real progress. I mean, for me, the line is 7 games. Win 7 games. And then next year, the playoffs absolutely have to be the expectation, because It's Joe Douglas's, well, technically it'll be his 5th year, but reality, it's his 4th year. And he had a big job, but you know something? By next year, he will have had 4 years to fix this thing. And it'll be Robert Saleh's 3rd year as a coach. You don't get forever. I think the Jets have taken a long-term approach. I think people have been pretty patient with them. But at some point, the wins do need to happen. And they need to begin happening this year. Again, Jets go 4-13 this year. There are going to be some big problems here. So it's not so much that they missed the playoffs because bad coaching. It's not so much that they missed the playoffs because bad talent. Maybe it's talent that's still developing. But Jets need to show progress. That saying the playoffs are not the final goal is not the same thing as saying the Jets need not to show progress this year. They need to show progress. Next question, what, if anything, would convince you to move on from Zach Wilson after the season? Or alternatively, what is the bare minimum you'd need to see out of Zach Wilson to convince you to keep him? Well, I think no matter what, Zach Wilson should be on the team in 2023 probably, because he'll probably be one of the 3 or 2 best quarterbacks the Jets have. There needs to be substantial improvements. I mean, if he doesn't look a lot better than he did a year ago, the odds are very much against him. That's just the way it is. I mean, typically in this league, if you're going to be good, you show it in the first 2 years. Yes, there are some exceptions. Yes, there are some notable late bloomers you can point to through history. But if you don't do it in your first 2 years, it's tough. I think Zach Wilson, I'd look for him to be a middle-of-the-pack quarterback this year. You're not going to go from where Zach Wilson was last year to the top of the league. He needs to be a middle-of-the-pack quarterback. And what I'll say is that a middle-of-the-pack quarterback on a rookie contract is extremely valuable, and it gives the Jets a chance. The last 2 years of his rookie deal, which would be 2023, 2024. If Zach Wilson gets to the middle of the pack and is cheap the next 2 years, Jets will have the chance to make some noise. And then it's a little bit tricky you're dealing with a middle of the pack quarterback when it comes to extension time. And who knows, maybe Zach Wilson builds from there and gets better. But for me, middle of the pack quarterback is what it takes for me to be confident in Zach Wilson entering 2023 as the starting quarterback of the Jets. If he can't do that, then I think it's probably going to be a discussion that we'll need to have, because I don't think that there are a lot of excuses this year for Zach Wilson. I think this roster around him is pretty good. I know he missed preseason. Well, all I heard of the offseason was how he was going to work with his receivers nonstop and how much this was going to help him. So how much does missing training camp and preseason make a difference? Second year in the system. I keep hearing second year in the system. Well, okay, he's second year of the system. He should be able to weather missing training camp in the preseason. Offensive line, okay, they threw it together last minute. It's still not an awful offensive line. It's not going to be as good as it will be, halfway through the season, 3/4 of the way through the season. There's going to need to be some development, but you don't get put into a perfect situation. Jets have pretty good skill players. Zach's got to make it happen. I heard all offseason all the reasons Zach was going to be great. Should not be derailed by preseason, by missing preseason and missing training camp. And our last question. I think Douglas's 2020 draft may be the worst in Jets history, and that's saying something. What do you think? You cannot whiff like this when the team is losing 36 games in a 3-year period. Criminally bad draft at the worst possible time for a bad franchise trying to rebuild. Idzik's head rolled for much less. I don't agree with that. Idzik's head did not roll for much less. Idzik really had no vision. I don't think there was any plan with Idzik. Did not show the focus on the core positions Joe Douglas has shown. No focus on the offensive line. No focus. We're going to compare what Joe Douglas did at corner to what Idzik did at corner. Joe Douglas drafted a blue chip prospect at corner. He went outside a quality player at corner. Idzik signed no corners. Idzik's solution on the offensive line was Breno Giacomini. We're saying Idzik and Joe Douglas are the same. I don't agree with that. Now, Joe Douglas's 2020 draft class is awful. And, maybe there's some bad luck with Becton, but it's awful. And Becton's always going to be compared with Tristan Wirfs and at the time, listen, nobody knew Becton was going to get hurt, but I can tell you at the time the perception was Becton was the swing for the fences pick. Wirfs was the safe pick. Joe Douglas swung for the fences and he struck out. So even with Becton, even though the injury, obviously comes into play there, still an issue. I still don't think you can completely let Joe Douglas off the hook for Becton. It was an awful draft. Here's the thing. Every GM has awful drafts. So the question is, I'm telling you, look through the great GMs. Look through the draft histories of GMs you think are great. You're going to find a one or two where they get absolutely zero value out of it. The question is, and it's tricky when it's the GM's first draft, The question is whether this is a sign this guy just can't draft, or if this was just one of the bad drafts that happened to come the first year and he actually will figure it out. And that's something we'll discover over the course of the next year or two, because 2021 draft class is going to develop. We'll see what happens with the 2022 draft class. And really, everything's been building for these next 2 years for the Jets. So we'll have a better sense then. I don't agree at this point that you can say Joe Douglas is worse than John Idzik. Listen, anything can happen. Who knows what we'll be saying a year or two from now. But while the 2020 draft class is not very good, I don't think that definitively closes the book on Joe Douglas being a good GM. And I certainly don't think it puts him in Idzik's class, because I see more of a plan here. I never understood what the plan was with Idzik. I think the only way Joe Douglas and John Idzik are the same are in very, very broad strokes, because their plans have more differences than they do similarities. Anyway, that's all for our episode today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the episode a big thumbs up. It helps the channel out and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Hope you have a great weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday to talk more Jets and get ready for the beginning of the NFL season, week 1. Next week is game week.